Hi, we continue in 2 Samuel 3 today after Abner has accomplished David's requirement that Michal be returned to him, and her husband Paltiel whines and weeps and is told to turn back by Abner. And so now we reach our scene in verse 17 where Abner is trying to get the Israelites and, interestingly, the Benjaminites as a separate group to go along with his call to go after under David's reign as king. So as we look at our section here, we've been following the shape of 2 Samuel 2:1 to 5:5, and we completed this unit where there was a division between Judah and Israel over the monarchy, and now we're in this section here around the attempt to broker a covenant. And as we've been noting, there are many links between this section and the story of Absalom's rebellion in chapter 15 to 19. And in our section today, the Benjaminites will be an element. We see them 6 times in this unit, 3 times in the other unit, and only 3 times elsewhere in all of 2 Samuel. As well as we just saw Baharim, the town where Ishbaal was in this context here. So we've also been looking at, and this will come up in our scene today, the various designations of those claiming David's royal authority. And so we'll see here in verse 17, Abner sent word to the elders of Israel, but then he quotes a promise that we don't know anything about of Yahweh telling his servant David that he would save my people Israel. And then we get to the Benjaminites. And we already saw the question of the house of Israel earlier, not ceding to David, but is named as an element here. And we're seeing others as well, including all Israel and all the people. So we'll be looking at that as we go. And we've also, as we've been doing, following the key words. And in this situation, the Hebrew word in red is translated, I left it as it is in the New RSV in most cases, because it could be translated as we see as went, go, let me go, or sent. And it's a different word than the word for sent here. This is the normal word for sending messengers, and this has to do with all the comings and goings that are in this passage. Another key word that might not seem like much of a key word is make, and I've translated it consistently here because what's being made is a monarchy. David as king is being made here through this process, and so one of the elements of that is the making the covenant that we see here. So let's jump right into our passage here where Abner sent word to the elders of Israel, and already there's some details that we need to look at here. No location is named for this message or the one in verse 19, and so how do we imagine where Abner was last seen in Mahanaim, although actually he was last seen walking Michal back here to Hebron where David is. And so Paltiel walked all the way to Baharim, which we noted last time is not a place that we know for sure where it's located. Most scholars consider it somewhere near Jerusalem. So Abner was on this road walking Michal back to David. But now, wherever he is, he sends word to the elders of Israel. And are we supposed to imagine the elders are a group that meet together? As my note here on Elders of Israel, here in Elders of Israel, this is the first mention of them here. We'll see them again in 5:3. But what's at issue is we saw them at the very beginning in 1 Samuel when they requested a king. And so that's what we need to go back to here in 1 Samuel 8:4. All the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "You are old and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations." Notice they don't ask for a particular king, whereas what Abner's saying here is for some time past you have been seeking David as king over you. We know nothing about that. There's nothing in 1 Samuel or what we've seen so far in 2 Samuel that shows the elders of Israel or really anybody seeking David as king over them. The word for seeking here, it's hard to pronounce without the vowels here. Here it's in the form of Navakshim here, is 37 times in 1 and 2 Samuel. It's mostly for seeking David's life in 1 Samuel, but it's never about Israel seeking David as king. So let's look a couple more of the details. The phrase for some time past is a phrase we've seen earlier, a figure of speech from yesterday and the day before. So it's suggesting that the elders have long wanted David to be king. But again, there's no evidence of that. If Abner's telling the truth, it's a truth that's reported outside of our story. Or is he trying to appeal to them on the basis of something that they haven't done? It's hard to know what basis he could persuade them that they have been seeking David if they haven't. And so that's the proposal, that they've been seeking it for a long time. And now he says, now bring it about or make it happen. And we need to look at the details before we look at the note from Halpern. For the Lord has promised David, or literally has said, promise is too strong, although what's being said here is not in 1 Samuel, as we've seen, through my servant David, or literally by the hand of. And hand is 3 times in this verse, and the RSV, as so often, covers up body parts, hands, eyes, ears, and so many. Through the hand of my servant David, and as Polzin notes, only prophets or kings are ever called servants of David in the Deuteronomistic history by either God or the narrator, but David gets 13 of 20 references. So a special role for him according to Deuteronomistic history here. But it's Yahweh who will save. It's not David who will save. It's through the hand of David that Yahweh will save my people Israel. And I didn't put my people Israel. I did put my people Israel here as an element of this because it's intending that Yahweh will save through a King David, although king isn't mentioned here, although we don't know that the people of Israel have agreed to that at this point. So we can't really say they're claiming royal authority here under David, but Yahweh thinks they will be. So through the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies. So one hand versus the other hands. And the phrase hands of the Philistines we'll see a couple more times. It was 7 times in 1 Samuel. And in chapter 19, which is part of the collective parallel with what we see here in chapter 15 and 19. We'll recall these words. We can look at that there. The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines. Notice here the NRSV has hand in both places. That's when he's fleeing from Absalom. So it's fulfilled there within the voice of the people of Israel. And yet we hear no response. He's saying this to the elders, and yet we don't hear anything about what their response is to this. Nor do we know where or how that scene is happening. In the passage in 1 Samuel 8, we saw the elders of Israel gathered together on their own. But how Abner got all the elders of Israel to listen to him, we don't know. And then the scene shifts, and it also shifts without telling us a location or a time or how it's happening. So he spoke again, the NRSV, leaving out in the ears of the Benjaminites. And notice the Benjaminites, who are one of the links here, Benjaminites, between our passage and the Absalom story later, but they're separate from Israel here. So we'd already heard that David would be made king over the house of Judah and the house of Saul, but where do the Benjamites fall? The Benjaminites, as we know, are the people from whom Saul came originally, and yet we saw in 1 Samuel the argument by many, including Joel Baden and Baruch Halpern, that there was a so-called 4th column of Benjaminites who were loyal to David secretly and reporting to David where Saul was. That's how David knew that Saul was after him and how he managed to stay alive. The text never says that quite out loud, but it could certainly fit with friends of Jonathan, who we know is explicitly on David's side and unfaithful to his father's great chagrin. So this seems to suggest the entire body of Benjaminites rather than some subset of them. But again, how Abner spoke to all the Benjaminites or where that's happening isn't said. And we also hear no response. But the narrator tells us that Abner went to tell David at Hebron all that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin were ready to do. What is it they're ready to do? We haven't heard anything. And so here the narrator elides the entire conversation. We don't hear out loud what Abner said, and we don't hear anything from the Benjaminites. We just hear this summary that he spoke directly to their ears, and we don't hear what he told them. Presumably he told them something similar, but we don't know that they've been seeking David as king any more than we know the Israelites have been seeking David as king. So in this very mysterious scene where we hear no responses from them, only the narrator tells us that all that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin only hear, as Mari Leonard Fleckman notes, this and the house of Ephraim as separate from the polities of Israel, of Judah and Israel. And again, we've heard nothing about their response. And then we have a separate verse here that suggests a separate coming, but plainly this is just the one visit, that he's coming to Hebron, as we can see from the map here, having followed Paltiel back, but it's hard to imagine why he isn't already in Hebron, other than the fact that he had to go back to talk to the elders of Israel. Where that was, all the way back in Mahanaim, we don't know. Where the Benjaminites in Gibeon, which is Saul's, I'm sorry, not Paul, that's a different story. Saul's hometown, again, none of this is told, but now he's told we're coming back to Hebron with 20 men. And we don't hear who they are or why this number. And again, with no response from David and no introduction, David made a feast for Abner and the men. And it's very interesting, I think, how the narrator is not giving us any detail here of the actual exchanges. And so David is doing these things, but we don't know if he's going through the motions, if he set this up ahead with Joab. The following scene that we'll look at next video certainly suggests that Joab comes in shocked that David is making this deal with Abner and doesn't suspect, as Joab certainly does, that Abner will betray him. But we just don't hear from David. David is very much a sphinx in this scene. So Abner came with the 20 men, and David made a feast. And the word for feast, mishtah, is just like the feast that Lot offers for the visitors in Genesis 19, and similar with what we see for David's men in the Nabal story, and it'll also be in the Solomon story. But it's generally understood as a drinking feast. It's very different than, for example, the feast that Abraham and Sarah make for the visitors in contrast with Lot's. It's a very male sort of gathering as well, and this is all men here. So David makes this feast. It doesn't say they entered any kind of covenant or any kind of agreement. It just says he's doing that. And notice it doesn't say his servants made it. It's suggesting he's making this feast by himself. Abner's there with 20 men, and we don't hear anybody around David, including Joab, which would lead us to wonder about Joab or all the young men or the chosen men who've been around David. But the way the scene is presented here, it's Abner and 20 men versus David. And so, again, Abner speaks, and yet again we hear no response from David. So no response from the elders of Israel, no response from the Benjaminites, and no response from David. It's only Abner talking. So Abner says to David, "Let me go and rally here, or gather," as we saw back in 225 and 230, "gather all Israel to my lord the king." This is the first time that David is being referred to as my Lord the King. All these times back in 1 Samuel, it's referring to Saul as Lord the King, and all in the mouth of David, here to the Philistines, but here in the cave and other situations where he's referring to his fealty to the Anointed One of Yahweh. It's 32 times in 2 Samuel and 14 times in 1 Kings, but notice it's never in 2 Kings as the monarchy declines and kings are no longer called my Lord the King. So he's already referring to David as my Lord the King. Ishbaal, still alive, but rendered useless in the background. In order they may make a covenant with you. And we already saw that Abner proposed via messengers to make a personal covenant with David, but now the proposal is all Israel will make this covenant with David, so that you may reign over all that your heart desires. Notice not over what Yahweh desires, or nothing about the will of Yahweh. He hasn't said anything about Yahweh here at all. It's simply David's personal desire. The word is nephesh, and it's curiously translated as heart here. In the exact same phrase translated in 1 Kings 11 is translated as your soul, and soul is completely foreign to the Hebrew Bible, and so that's just wrong on the No RSV standpoint. But heart isn't right either. Nephesh is neither heart nor soul. It's your essence, your being. So all that the essence of you desires. So without a word, David dismissed Abner in peace, and there's a chiasm with the next two sentences, but we're going to stop here because this is where Joab comes back and clearly creates another scene, as we see in the key words here, where he sent him away in peace. So David dismissed Abner, or literally sent Abner, and he sent him away in peace, using two different words. And so as far as we as readers know, David and Abner are at peace. David has accepted Abner's proposal that all Israel and all the Benjaminites will accept him as king, but we haven't seen any of the Benjaminites and we haven't seen any of the Israelites. And do we really know it's possible? Does David really believe that that's what's happening? We're going to have to look at it next time in the next video when Joab comes back and we see how David responds then. See you next time for that. Bye-bye.